Good afternoon, everybody. Great, nice response, brilliant. So whilst the panel members are coming to the front, I think I'm just going to introduce this session. That's also another 45 minutes of discussions, very exciting discussions, because we've moved from the finance session and really now moved into looking at the sort of, the role of gender within the whole restoration agenda. So we have a fantastic panel and we have really great speakers who have extensive experience on really looking at the different roles of men and women in the whole aspect of landscape restoration. We have one panel member, unfortunately, who's stuck somewhere as they're getting into the UN complex and will be joining us fairly soon. But I want to begin by introducing who the panel members are, and a little bit like Joyce's session, I'm going to have a sort of a living room discussion, so to speak. I also want to mention that on my right-hand side, I have the Francophone speakers, and on my left-hand side, I have the Anglophone speakers. So it's really exciting. So, yeah. Non, c'est bon si vous souhaitez parler en français.
You could speak in French if you will.
I would like to begin by really saying that in the way we have existed on the planet and in the way we have navigated our landscapes, two things have happened. Both men and women engage in different roles or collectively in terms of how they manage resources. And today we have the opportunity of really having a really great panel, and I would like to start with Mustafa. Mustafa is from Morocco, and he is the director or the executive director of Fondation Hardy pour la Microcrédit. Shiro. Come on to my left-hand side, please, welcome. So, Mustafa, I would like to understand from you, because we've just listened to the finance panel, really interesting, looking at grants, microfinance, and also looking at these blended finances. I mean, things that I'm not an economist, I don't quite understand. You have extensive experience in working with communities on products from the landscape, both from an agriculture perspective, but also resources in these landscapes. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience in this kind of funding and microfinance and value chains, and the role of both men and women in this? S'il vous plaît, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor. Thank you very much. I think that project implementation in landscapes and restoration come through implementation of big-scale projects. So it concerns a rural population, men and women, who have very small holdings, who don't have technical expertise, and who do not have access to the market. And I won't give you all the challenges that rural agriculture faces, and we understand that there are huge amounts of money that are available, but the real question is, how do you transform those billions and millions of dollars into small microfinance that are going to impact small holding families in the villages who are going to use that money? And that's the biggest question to be answered, because very good business people are seeing that this is a very high-risk initiative, but there are models that can help us go ahead. We could fund agricultural products, be they small, big, with risk mitigation models. We can have distribution channels with prudential measures that we have had in Morocco, for example. We have managed to build this model, and we are sharing it with other African countries, and it has been recognized by FAO and World Bank, etc. So today we can fund, because the sinew of war is credit for people to improve their livelihoods and also to improve their agricultural practices and have access to the markets. Thank you.
Mustafa has talked about. I want to come to you, Nigel. Nigel is coming from, he's the chief program officer of this Rainforest Alliance. You have worked extensively within forest ecosystems and landscapes where you look at commodities. And as Mustafa rightly said, sometimes there are all these elements of risk that we have to manage. in your experience, how have you navigated all of that?
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and congratulations on a fantastic meeting to C4 and the Global Landscape Forum. We are here because we are managing partnerships with farmers and forest communities all across this continent. Many of our team are here as well. I'll actually plug a panel we have at 4 o'clock this afternoon in the tent, just down here, talking about how we're working with millions of smallholder farmers across Africa who are achieving forest and landscape restoration in various forms, financed through the tea, cocoa, coffee, and other supply chains. So a very exciting stories coming out from the field and that work. There's growing interest in this. We see growing demand from the global market, from consumers who are increasingly concerned about what they consume, where it comes from, how it's produced, and the issues in the supply chains around workers' rights, basic human rights, child labor, deforestation, illegal removal of communities from forest areas, and so on. So our certification programs and the landscape work that we do associated with that basically aims to help those communities and smallholders, and particularly women, and I'd like to hope we talk a bit more about that aspect. It's so fundamental. So specifically targeting the needs of women and children in these communities to help them become more productive and benefit more from the evolution of these markets. So that's why we're here, and yeah, very complementary to what Mustafa was talking about.
Thank you so much, and that really just takes me now to Cecile. Cecile, you've had extensive experience, and he's just indicated how a lot of consumers are concerned about, how women have played a role in also sort of receiving or being recipients of either resources to restore the land, or how they're, in the case of Morocco, how do their goods even get to market, part of these value chains? In your experience, you've worked extensively in this field. You are an extinguished and distinguished, amazing woman who's a member of many things, and really worked with so many women across not just within Cameroon, but even just in the SAB region. What has been your experience?
Thank you so much. Yes, we are working with women and men all over the African region. And in the restoration process, we think that we need to continue to engage men and women together to have an effective and long-term sustainable restoration process and program. And for that, it's very important to understand that women have special roles, special needs, and special limitations. We should make sure that we understand that men and women who are present in the same landscape have different roles and different expectations. That's the basic of any actions if we really want to push for gender equality and effective and sustainable restoration program and project. And for that, first of all, we have to ensure that there is an effective participation of women and men in the programs, right from the beginning, in the design, in the formulation, in the implementation, in the monitoring, and of course, in the decision-making and in the sharing of the benefits. This is key. When they take part to all that, we are more likely to achieve gender equality and equity among all the stakeholders. It's also important, and this is really specific for the rural and indigenous women, to be given adequate representation in all governance structures that are related to land and forest, as well as all other landscape structure. It's very important. Then they can influence from inside, and they can push for change. Rural and indigenous women as well should be supported to work as network, because it's all together that we can influence and we can make a good step instead of being individually. And the women are now lacking. The networking is like lacking because of lack of support. Let's support rural and indigenous women network so that they can voice their issues and make a difference. It is important. People should understand, and I started with that. How can we engage the men? Women cannot be taken in isolation in this process. We need to engage with men, and we need to help men understand. Sometimes it's not because they don't want to do, but sometimes, and most of the time, it's because they don't understand what are the added values of having women on board. How can they contribute to the better position and to secure their even their male interests? So we have to make sure we help them, we support them in understanding that. And we need to work with them, develop activities that can help them change the attitude. The culture, the traditional practices, we cannot wipe them out. They are part of their life. Women have been educated and have been living in those contexts. So we have to understand and build on that. How can we have to understand that and try to understand the dynamics within those bylaws, community bylaws, traditional practices, and rules and culture. Then we can start trying to shift the dynamics or changing them for gender equality. This is what I can share for now, and not forgetting the key issue of funding and technology, access to information, key for them to continue to give what they have started giving for many decades. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Cécile. Bon, Madame Voré.
Madame Voré.
She is the deputy mayor of Bargny in Senegal, and she is working with an amazing network of women in her country and is the president of Green Senegal. I would like to hear from you in your experience, especially that you live in a city that's somehow degraded even from a coastal perspective, but I just really want to understand both the role of women, and particularly women, in restoring some of these degraded landscapes. Thank you. Vous avez la parole.
You have the floor. Thank you, Madam. Thank you for having invited me in this meeting. And here I came here for the first time in 2005 to prepare for the Convention on Desertification and the launch of Terra Africa. So it is a great pleasure to be back here. When you're talking about Deputy Mayor, I beginning to tremble because I don't get along with the mayor. So I decided to work alone. So I work at the town hall, but I work on the ground mostly, and we're doing the heavy lifting because Senegal is 700 kilometers of coastline, and we have rocky coastlines and also mangroves. So we decided to work in those areas because climate change and the rise of sea levels is actually affecting our agricultural lands, and we are a country that is dependent on agriculture, where 60% of the population works in agriculture. So the Ministry of Environment asked us to look at the women resilience to climate change, and we realized that for us the strategies that men use to counter climate change is migration, because it's very easy for men to leave compared to men. Men or women would like to stay behind to raise children. They produce food, and they are the same people who have to fight land degradation, because degraded lands do not produce anything, and they only exacerbate the vulnerability of those women. That's why, with the researchers of ISRAN, we've set in place programs to use species of acacia, of other species that come from Australia or India, eucalyptus, because they are well adapted to these lands. So we also have adapted rice seeds that have a short maturing period, 2 to 3 months. So we decided in Senegal that we need to strengthen women's capacities, because when we strengthen their capacities, they are more able to produce, and they know the technologies, but you need to help them. With researchers, we need to see resilient methods. Is it seeds? We need to look at research. Short cycle seeds, working on drip irrigation, looking at agricultural food processing, like Madame has said, set up networks for women to be entrepreneurs so they can learn from one another, to go from one village to another, to see that it is not always easy to see their husbands or sons leave and you just sit back at home, because the work that was done by men is supposed to be done by you because they're left. And it is on those issues that we wanted to work on. So the government is changing the approach. We have gender-oriented programs. I'm lucky to be a member of the Economic and Social Environmental Forum. But in our women's network, we have 3 women members of parliament who are in the National Assembly, and they have the possibility to make decisions. For example, we are mayors, we are members of parliament, we can actually weigh in decisions. We pushed for the law in Senegal to change the law. We were told that we don't pollute, but it is not because of that reason that we should not have a climate law. The climate law allows us to think about a better resilience, to think about better programs and see how climate affects development. And it is on those issues that we have been working. Thank you.
Vora really raises the complications of degradation, whether we have the money or not have the money. And I think you really highlight wonderfully how it's so complex that, you see communities become disintegrated. Men leave, women stay, and the women who remain, not only do they become, their roles suddenly change. They become the father, the mother, the grandfather, and everything, and all of that. It becomes incredibly complex. I want to come to Kenya now. Mikoko. Josephat is from Mikoko Moja, which means, what does it mean? Mangroves together in Kiswahili. So he's coming from Kwale, coastal Kenya, another region that has seen some levels of degradation, but also a place which is incredibly beautiful on the eastern seaboard in this country. How do you work in your role around mangrove restoration? Because we now see a convergence from the land, from the sous-terre, now to getting into the blue carbon, so to speak. Over to you, Joseph.
So thank you very much, Madam Sonda, for this opportunity, and I wish to thank GLA for this opportunity, because it's one of a kind of opportunity, and a very rare one, because it gives opportunities to local communities and people like us to showcase what we are doing. And I want to share about my experience, particularly about the story of the project and the success, how we involve both men and women in the project, which has made the project to be successful, so that you can see the value of the role of making sure that there is gender equality in terms of restoration of landscapes. So Mikoko Pamoja is a community-led initiative, as Madam has said. It's located in Gazibe, and it is purely community-led initiative. So in terms of management, decision-making, the restoration, the implementation of the annual activities, nursery establishment, restoration, all these are made by the local communities which include both men and women. So on the management level, let's start with the management level, whereby it's made up of 13 members committee, where there is a 50-50 presentation of gender, where 6 are men and 7 are women. Actually, the women have surpassed the men in terms of management of the project. And everybody, both genders are given priorities, the same priorities, because regardless of your gender, you can be given a high executive position, such as secretary. In fact, I came with a colleague here of mine who is a woman also, and she's the secretary. Mama Hafsa, try to wave. Yeah, she's the secretary of the project. So that is a management aspect whereby women are much involved in the same way as men. When it comes to decision making also, now that it is a community-led initiative, we have to bring in all people, regardless of their ages, gender, and everybody is given the same priority and the same opportunity, or in other words, the same chance to air out their views in terms of decision making. And it is very, very crucial because it has worked on our side. And we from the previous activities which we have implemented with these funds of which we earn from carbon crediting, it has helped a lot in education and water and sanitation, whereby we have actually helped a lot in women, for the women who used to move a long distance to get this water from this important commodity. And then, in now implementation of the annual activities now, we have to ensure that gender is, there is well representation of gender. Like in most of the activities, if we want to establish, because the activities are in the range of monitoring, nursery establishment, and planting, we have to ensure that both men and women participate in these in these activities. So, if we have an establishment activity, and like we have maybe 20 people who are supposed to participate, we call like 10 men and 10 women to come and participate. And the good thing is that women are very, very crucial because they understand, they are natural caregivers from household, and they actually take good care of these seedlings, you know, planting them and doing all this work. So it's very, very crucial. And but you know, another aspect also, we have demonstrated at Gazi Bay that working as a group, men and women, giving them the same chance is crucial towards success of any kind of restoration and actually any kind of project. But local communities actually lack the expertise in doing these things. So there is a break between, there is a barrier between the local communities, policymakers, and even the researchers. So we should close this barrier so that communities, both men and women, can be given these opportunities to showcase their work, like what we have, like the way I am here. I'm actually showcasing my, because most of the time, those people who attend such kind of meetings are expertise, but it's rare you get a local community member having a chance like this one. So we should close these kind of barriers and offer education to them so that they can succeed, like they have succeeded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. You actually raise a valid point about, you know, bringing everybody to the table. And I think we've seen in the Global Landscapes Forum that we have voices from the ground. I want to introduce the last and not so final speaker, but an amazing woman. Shiro Waithaka is a lady who decided after she had children that the furniture she had was not functional, did not make sense for her children. So she learned and became a carpenter and started to run her own company, and her business is dependent on wood. Now, we would like to hear from somebody who's really in the manufacturing business. She runs her company, and really to get an understanding how, in a country like Kenya, which has reached a stage where they have banned any wood, if you get any hardwood in this country, be assured that it's illegally acquired from Congo. But here is a woman who's rethinking her business in terms of how you model, and also really the role of women and in the manufacturing industry. So it would be really good to hear from you and get your perspective on this.
Thank you for the honor to be here. It truly, truly is. As somebody asked me as I was coming in if I'm an environmentalist, I was like, well, I live in the environment and I use products from the environment, so I should be part of this positive conversation. My background, I'm an interior architect who has seen the gap for quality products for children in Africa and has decided to do something about that. So our brand is Fun Kids. We care about children and the youth through training, innovation products, as well as nutrition. So those of you who know, Kenya now has a ban on logging, so that means I then don't have raw material or access to affordable raw material. And my entire investment as a business owner goes down the drain because there's no plan B.
Going to be a difficult.
So theoretically, it's a good thing, but practically it hasn't considered all stakeholders. And this is where we come in and we're saying, okay, yes, the environment is critical, but how do we ensure that Africa and the youth in this room, some of them I met on Tuesday, are able to also start industries. Globally, we know trees are needed. We need paper, which we bring in from Sweden at the moment. It doesn't make sense. Those of you who know, again, the industry of manufacturing, especially furniture, there are no women. We're very few. In my own company, sadly, I'm the only woman, and we've tried to get women in, but again, listening to the cultural barriers that we know exist, this is not possible. So it was interesting just listening and thinking, but the men in my organization have women in their communities. The gentlemen who we pay a salary every month have to then support their families who live out in the villages. We could start an initiative where we actually encourage the women and the younger generation to plant not just trees, but the right trees needed for our sector. Currently, we're looking at innovation. We talked about rice being a food crop. We're now trying to R&D the use of rice husks combined with sawdust and turning this into usable boards. So we're also cleaning up the environment. We have now become experts in the circular economy. Kenya is a net importer, so anybody importing anything that's coming on a wooden pallet, I am stocking them, and I am buying the pallets from them. I am then doing urban mining by removing the nails from the pallets, which are smelted and given to other people in the metal industry, and I then convert what was somebody's waste into usable raw material for my business. And again, shockingly, we've been able to reduce the cost of production and cost of quality products to Kenyans and Africa by embracing the circular economy and looking at more sustainable and impactful raw materials. We must grow as a continent, but we need to care for the environment as people in industry. I talk to the young people in the room. You don't keep complaining that there are no jobs. Please, if you can supply me with responsible forest trees, I will happily buy, because I want my business to be one of the biggest in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiro. On that note, I really would like to open the floor for people, because I know people are dying to ask some of these amazing panel members some questions. So we have like 20 minutes, and I would like to open it up because there's so much to discuss, and I just don't want this to be a one-way traffic. I want it to be a two-way traffic. So if you have a question, if you can just raise your hand, introduce yourself, and please tell me whether you're addressing the question to everybody or any one particular panel member. So over to you. Please, if you can just introduce yourself, sir.
Okay, good evening. I'm Felix Kiprono, a conservation student at the University of Nairobi. Not really a question, but a comment on this very sensitive issue. I liked how the lady from Niger approached the gender issue, which has been a challenge, that the women and the men should work mutually in building a greater society. That thing is a takeaway for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sia?
Thank you very much, esteemed panelists. My question goes to Mustafa and a bit the rest also of the panelists. So Mustafa, you working for the Crédit Agricole, when you hear all these examples, what are the kind of like project or services that actually your entity, your institution can offer to these kind of projects? Thank you.
Can we take a couple of more questions? I'll have the lady and then I'll have Abdelkader, please.
Thank you. My name is Maria Sengelela. I work for Solidaridad. I would like to know if there is any measurements you are doing to close gender gaps at family level, because I have had interventions at the sectorial level, but I would like to know about what you're doing at the family level.
Abdelkader?
Yes, ma question va.
My question is for Ms. Goy from Senegal. I'd like to have a bit more information regarding the role of women in the field of livestock raising, which is very important economically as well, very interesting. Nevertheless, the role of women within the livestock raising sector is quite neglected, even if they often cover all activities with regards to cattle. But revenues always go to men. Is this due to tradition, which is hard to shift, or are there some perspectives within which this tradition could be changed? Because really often women do take on more responsibility. Thank you. Thank you, Abdelkader.
I can see a hand over there. Please, if you can introduce yourself.
Merci.
Thank you.
I come from, sorry, I speak French.
I am Haidar Elali. I'm from Senegal. I have a question for the banker on the panel. When you plant a forest of fruit trees, for example, a hectare of coconut trees, then profitability is very high. So after 5 years, we'll have 500 coconuts per tree, so 80,000 coconuts for 1 hectare, which costs 100 francs. So 1 million francs per hectare after 5 years. But the problem is that when you have debts, you have to start paying this off after 3 or 5 months when we don't yet have fruit. And this applies to other fruit trees as well. So what financial model could take this into account? Because financial interests are very high. So we need to really cover all costs. But what bank will wait for 5 years to receive a return on their investment? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Boré, vous voulez commencer?
Ms. Vore, would you like to begin? Yeah, I wanted to thank and congratulate my minister, Mr. Haidar. He was the environment minister in Senegal. He was shy to talk, so I'm representing him. So thank you, Minister, even though your question goes to Mr. Mustafa. But for my friend talking about livestock raising, in Senegal we are lucky, and this is quite rare in Africa, in that we have a female minister. The minister for cattle livestock is a woman and very combative. We could say that for small-scale farming, such as the raising of sheep or goats, in general is left to women because revenue comes back to them. And in terms of milking, they can actually add value to the production of milk and produce other products, etc. So for these small animals, they can receive quite high revenues. For large-scale livestock, for example, cattle in general, this is left to the men because this is a prestige area of agriculture. They have hundreds of heads of cattle who roam the plains and often speed up degradation, land degradation, because there's so much cattle and there's not really a form of management, rational, reasonable form of management for this kind of livestock raising to reduce the overuse of resources, of trees and of hay, etc. But to come back to women, I think that we can strengthen their knowledge in the area of small-scale livestock raising, because that could help them tap into even more areas of revenue. They could diversify their agriculture, diversify their measures and methods to receive more revenue, and this kind of small-scale livestock raising would be a certain area of interest. Thank you. I would just start to answer Mr. Haidar. Minister, a bank which does not adapt to reality on the ground is not a bank, in particular in the field of development. So we have to, and it's possible to give different amortization rates over 5 years or 10 years, we do this in oases and for date palms. So over a period of 5, 10 or 12 years with staggered interest rates and cultivation, because we know that date palms will only produce fruits after 6 or 7 years. So a banker that does not adapt to reality on the ground is not a banker. Secondly, how can we support a rural household? Well, I believe in a holistic approach within rural households. Therefore, we need an analysis. We have to adapt universal banks with cards and accounts, mobile banking, etc. We also need microcredits for, in particular, activities led by women, and other credits for people that don't have guarantees. These are 3 distribution channels with which we can focus on all rural households and provide them with financing to improve their revenues and really apply new techniques respecting the environment. What do we finance as bankers in the environmental field? Well, first of all, we finance reconversions of land that's not yet producing much, so from cereals into tree cultivation. Drip irrigation, the use of new energies, new forms of cattle raising, and we are also starting to finance the treatment and processing of waste in agriculture. I think this all starts to respect nature more. What are we doing to boost women's cooperatives? I think that a bank also needs to provide financial support and non-financial support. In terms of non-financial support, there are other stakeholders. In Morocco, we have corporation offices, we have the Agricultural Development Agency, we have other NGOs at local and international level who support cooperatives. But in terms of banks, I think that one of the most important things we can do is to provide access to financing. We do this by providing access to markets. We have to let people know the rules of the markets, in particular for women's cooperatives, and the smallest of them, those in the most isolated areas. So in Morocco, we've therefore created a solidarity market for cooperatives, both men's and women's cooperatives, but focusing in particular on women's cooperatives, in order to allow them to come and sell their products. They send these through their own means, either by car, truck, or train, and then it's stored in Casablanca in a warehouse near the station, and then many people come and can actually buy from this market there. So in Crédit Agricole, we support these markets and provide credit for these people and analyze their needs. But we are very strict on the governance aspect, so the commitments of the chair and treasurer and the teams of these cooperatives. So within the 3,000 cooperatives we support, the ones with the best governance are able to access markets and credit everywhere. Where there are issues in terms of governance, where there's misunderstandings between the members and their leadership, there are issues. So banks need to adapt to the reality on the ground, and they need to lead. When a small cooperative sees their products being bought by the general public in Casablanca, then they can go out to other towns. We are creating 10 of these such markets around Morocco. These are not just small traditional souks or markets. These are really high-end markets for display shop windows, and people are buying these products. I can tell you that nearly 2,000 people visit these markets, in particular during Ramadan, to buy honey, couscous, etc. And so the members and those responsible for these women's cooperatives need to become more aware, and that you can cooperate. They can work with designers for packaging, they can buy different packaging, etc. And they can really respond to the needs and expectations of consumers, and thanks to that they can improve their income. And I think that's also the role of banks. They can't do everything, but they can bring people together, bring different partners and stakeholders together to open up the horizons for these small cooperatives who are in isolated areas. Thank you.
There was a question about how we actually close the gender gap at the family level. I want to start with you, Cecile, and go this way if you have any reaction to that, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think the gender gap at the level of the family, when we relate it to the restoration, we have two things to think of. We have the ownership of the resources, and we have the livelihood development. It starts right from the family. It's at the family level. When you have a baby child, a male child or a girl child, in our tradition, in most of the sub-Saharan African countries, those babies who have just born have different rights. The baby boy have a right to own land and forest and all the resources. The baby girl has the role to go and plant her family, because she get married and create her own family and does not own anything from her native family. It starts from there. So we have to work on that. We have to work on men and women at the family level to make sure the ownership of the resources are for the women and for the men for effective restoration. We have to work on that. And we should also understand the restoration has to be beyond the tree planting. The restoration also has to deal with livelihood development, and what are the role of women and men at the family level to promote or to improve the living condition. We have to work on that. So at that level, that's where we really have to start with and push at the community level, national level, regional level, and international level. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. Nigel, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Musonda. And building on what Cecile was saying and putting it a little bit more in context with some key data here. So 26% of African households are headed by women. These households are more likely to be vulnerable and fall into poverty. In addition, men's farming plots are 35 to 40% more productive, according to the World Bank, in Africa than women's farming plots, due to inequality of access to inputs, to chemicals, to training, to credit, to finance, to labor, and so on, and due to bias in the extension services against women's needs. The services are attuned to the needs of men and male farmers. The result of this, and just so you see the need and also the opportunity here, the result of this is a 20 to 30% lowering of yields across the continent. And that translates into the potential to lift 150 million people out of extreme poverty and hunger, according to the FAO. This is the missed opportunity. And it's compounded by spending patterns. So women who earn $10, to get the equivalent benefits from that, men would need to earn $110 to get the same benefits in child health and nutrition. Women spend the money, let's say, differently from the way that the men spend the money. And also women face much greater risk of forcible displacement because they're not the landowners, as Cecile was saying, and the statistics on that are absolutely extraordinary. And because they're not the landowners, even when they lead the farm and are running the farm, they're less likely to make long-term investments and plant trees and so on. So what do we need to do about this? As Cecile was saying, formalizing land and tree rights for women, increasing their security and co-titling for women. The trainers and extension agents should be targeting women farmers much more and being much more responsive to their needs. This really surely is a low-hanging fruit. And bringing advice to women's doorsteps through the farmer field schools and accommodating their needs in terms of timing and place. And finally, those of us in the room, including Rainforest Alliance, we're very active in this area, need to be doing more to support women's organizations. So, for example, we, with Dutch government support through our sector partnerships program here in Africa, we're supporting groups like African Women in Coffee organization here in Kenya, the International Women in Coffee Alliance in Uganda, and several other groups, so that they can become much stronger and much more effective advocates for their interests and gender-related work across the region. So this is sort of the wider context and the opportunity and the tremendous benefits that would flow from addressing these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Josephat, do you have any reaction to bridging the gender gap at the family level?
think I'll also emphasize, according to what my colleague here has said, it's very critical. This issue is very critical, but I think there are all over countries there are laws which actually promote women participation and gender balance. But what we have actually, what has made us lag behind is our perception and culture towards the way we live, I mean, women involvement in such kind of programs. So I think the issue here, we should actually try to mobilize and, I mean, create awareness so that people can follow these kind of laws and maybe policies. If we say there should be a 50-50 presentation of men and women within a certain restoration program, that should be the case. We mobilize people. We have 10 men participate in this particular program of restoration. We should also have 10 women participating in the same particular restoration program. So there should be that kind of awareness creation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Shiro, do you have any reaction to that, please?
Yes, quite a bit. Thank you. If you look at our industry that focuses on children and youth, for every child who sleeps on a bed, we've used timber. So the women could be encouraged in the villages to plant trees, and I would love to almost move to Morocco, where banks are innovative enough and can then fund those women, knowing that I am a guaranteed customer for the responsible timber. They could then also set up their own mills. The domino and positive economic benefit from that supply chain is unbelievable. We also have, at the moment, the highest rate of malnutrition and obesity in Kenya, for example. The same women could probably intercrop and grow our traditional foods, your cassavas, your sweet potato, and be taught the value add as well, which obviously releases more economical benefit for them, which they could sell. And the men who then work in the factories don't have to feel the burden of supporting the women, and the women are then also doing what they do best, still respecting the traditions that may be from a particular community and impacting themselves. Each bed we make needs a blanket or bedding. We could get the women empowered in skills like crochet, knitting. Then you go back in the value chain and think, where would they get that raw material from? Maybe we need to plant cotton. Maybe we need to do other materials that can be used. So if you look at one product, like I say, example of a bed or a chair or a sofa, including cushions and textiles, the industries that need to be created to support that one product is phenomenal. But the women, I believe, who are good at textiles and making blankets, etc., could be so empowered that they don't have to come into the cities. They can do this from the village. It costs 15 shillings to buy a crochet needle. A bale of crochet is 1,000 shillings. From that, you can easily produce enough products from your village without electricity, just sitting on a stool outside. So we need to start looking at industry being able to support the entire value chain and women being at the core of this.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I really would like to thank all the panel members. If we can give them another round of applause, please. No, thank you so very much for staying and listening in. And I wish you a fantastic afternoon and rest of the day deliberations. And enjoy your coffee and tea. Thank you so much.
Thank you.